Hello everyone. I'm Rashi and I welcome you all to CodeChef-VIT's Hacktoberfest live session on getting started with open source. So today we have with us Mr. Anand Chaudhary, who is the co-founder and CTO of Fabio, a Switzerland-based interior and rental furniture service, also a well-known GitHub star. Some of his notable contributions include the contribution to NASA's Mars 2020 helicopter mission and also 2020 GitHub Archive program. He's a part of 20 plus organizations, has made around 7,000 contributions in the last year, and has contributed towards 160 plus repositories. So let's get started with our interactive session with Mr. Anand Chaudhary, who will help us understand the journey of open source contribution, followed by a hands-on session by an open source mentor at CodeChef-VIT. So I'll hand over the session to Aditya now.
Thank you, Rashi.
Yes.
It's actually super interesting because 7,500 is probably my lowest because I got super distracted with work in the past year, so I haven't done a lot of open source. But I guess last year and the year before that, I was probably at like 15,000 range. That was my ballpark. Those were my glory days. But yeah.
That's great.
That's amazing. So, good evening, everybody. I am Aditya Devdeshmukh. I am a core committee member of CodeChef-VIT. First of all, I would like to give a warm welcome to our guest, Mr. Anand Chaudhary. Since Rashi introduced him to everybody, let us start the Q&A session without any further delay.
Awesome.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So the first question I would like to ask is, what was your motivation behind starting to contribute towards open source?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think back then I didn't really think of it as a way like I needed a serious motivation because I was doing it for a particular reason. Like back then it was just and I'm thinking like many years ago, it was more like I'm writing code. There's no benefit of me using version control and just leaving it on my computer. Why not put it on GitHub, right? And it just started kind of like that. But then some of my projects took off and people were excited about them. And I thought, okay, maybe this can be a proper open source project. And the others just became like stale repos. Today, I think it's a really important part of my life because you cannot build anything now basically like from scratch, right? Like it's like if you want to make a pancake from scratch, you have to invent the universe first. And so like if you look at, I don't know, you do npm init and you just do install a package and get started with Express to build a little web app. There's like thousands of projects that you rely upon knowingly and unknowingly. And so all of this work has been done by amazing open source contributors who are volunteers. And so I think if you still need a motivation to get started, I think it's a really good way to give back to the ecosystem and to the community that so for example, I know you guys just said that I contributed to the Mars helicopter mission, and what I did there was just a tiny typo PR in Bootstrap, which was used by the people who actually put a helicopter on Mars. And so I think the bigger point here is that no contribution is too small. You can just start by doing your little part, and maybe it grows onto something. Back then, I didn't know any of this, right? So for me, it was just, okay, I have some code. Let me open source it, and that's just how it started.
Yeah, it's nice knowing that you can just start coding and then get into open source so easily.
Yeah.
So, what would be your tips to like beginners who are trying to get into open source? So there are a lot of platforms like GitHub, and some of it can be a bit hard for students or any professionals who are trying to go into the open source world and contribute towards projects. So what would be some tips that you might give them?
Yeah, Aditya, like you said, if you can just start by coding, that's one way. But of course, you don't need to know how to write code even to contribute to open source software. If you're good at design, maybe you make a logo for a popular open source library, or you might give a talk and teach people about it, or you might host an event. So there's a lot of ways you can give back to the ecosystem and to it doesn't have to be code. But if you want it to be, then I think today it with all of these great documentation tools and all of the new GitHub features, it's really easier than ever to get started. For example, I like to look at the good first issue label on GitHub repos, and you can search across repos and find projects which have this label, and that's because the maintainers think this could be a great way to get started. It could be, I like to use SourceGraph or a tool to just better understand the library's code when I use it in my project. So just while reading the source code, maybe you realize, hey, maybe I would do it in a different way, and that could be an interesting solution. So you might open an issue or start a discussion. It might be a feature request. It might be a refactor. So I think if you have a technical background, like I think a lot of you might do, the best way is to improve the documentation if you're just getting started, maybe refactor parts of legacy code bases, open issues, open discussions. Even if you don't have any new ideas, you can comment on issues or upvote discussions that you think are valuable for the project. I think, like I said, no contribution is too small. And there are like these little hacks now that like the good first issue label or the up for grabs label, which help you find easier than monstrous tasks to begin with. And then, of course, the last option is what I did, which is just write code and put it up there, right? Like it doesn't have to be contributions to major open source projects. A bootstrap doesn't have to be your first contribution. Maybe you
Yes.
realize that you have a new idea and you want to start something. You get a few friends and you just make your own repo, or you might like something you read on Hacker News and you start the repo, and then you have some new ideas for features. You open an issue. I think one of the things that I think people are afraid of, I don't know if this is gatekeeping or not, but people have this kind of in their mind that I don't want to be embarrassed on the internet by saying something stupid or by not
Yes.
being the best programmer in the room. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think it ever was, but today more than ever. Um, if you're a good designer, if you're a good speaker, if you want to do events, if you want to write code, if you want to do none of them but just contribute ideas, there's a lot of space now. And with the new GitHub features and all of this encouragement, it's easier than ever. Also, if you want to start learning something new, like learning to code, I think it's easier than ever. And open source, like I don't know, free code camp or something, plays a big part in getting people started.
Yes, definitely. Now more than ever, it's easier to learn to code. We have sites like YouTube where thousands
Hmm.
of people are posting videos on how to learn to code in like a short amount of time, and it has really helped the community.
Absolutely.
So, um, aside from say contributing towards the society, what are some of the perks that you get from contributing towards open source?
Oh wow, that's really interesting. I think impact. It doesn't have to be societal, but just in general, I feel like um, it's almost like the butterfly effect that you do a tiny thing and then it becomes this huge thing because it goes step by step and other people build on top of it. Um, for example, again with the Mars helicopter, I just did a typo, and a lot of other people did typos and fixes and CSS additions to Bootstrap. And Bootstrap is just one tiny part of the landing page about the project, and not even directly related to the engineering of the helicopter, which was also open source. And so I think um, just like you do a tiny thing and it becomes really big and you get to see it, I think that's really exciting.
Yes.
So for me personally, I've had 100 plus repos which have maybe 5 stars or less because they were interesting projects that I had an idea for. I quickly built it up for myself, almost like a way to scratch your own itch. But then once in a while there's a project that people really like. So just like, for example, I was building in AI calendaring assistant thingy a couple of years ago. And one of the dependencies I made for that is a project called Calendar Link on NPM. And it's nothing, it just generates a link to calendar services like Google Calendar, Yahoo Calendar, Outlook, etc. But apparently, that was more useful than my main project. And that has like, I don't know, tens of thousands of weekly downloads, or my open source project Uptime, which is an uptime monitor. I think that has like 8,000 or something stars now. And again, it started as like a tiny thing that I just wanted to quickly tinker with something because I had a problem and I thought, hey, maybe I can make a tiny open source project out of it. And then it's really motivating to see other people build on top of it and have feature requests and ideas and open bug issues. and really just use it. And so I think apart from the societal part, which is of course giving back to the community, making really making software better for everyone, I think it's in your personal selfish interest also to do a good job with open source. And then I would say one last thing about the societal impact, because it's not just about engineering or education, there can be real impact. So, for example, I gave a talk at GitHub Satellite earlier this year about how we. So, I started a little nonprofit with a bunch of other people and really smart companies during the pandemic last year, Corona 2020, where we were collecting money and then donating food to people who are migrant workers and so on. And a lot of this was actually on GitHub, because we had this whole GitHub Actions workflow and a really transparent repo where you could see all of the money we've collected, how we're procuring the food, who is it going to, even photos of each person who receives the food, to make it super transparent and nice. And so I think the point I'm making is that open source can also be a force for real groundwork, real good in the world. And so I think the societal impact is not just limited to the educational aspect. I think just during COVID, there have been so many great resources and repos to track data, to get accountability from governments. And it's almost like the open source community came together during the pandemic and really used open source as a tool for change. And so I think that would be the third bigger item in this list. That, yeah, sure, the education part, giving back to the ecosystem is really important. It's super motivating, but I think you can do real impact with open source.
Yes, definitely. I would not have thought of using GitHub as a source for NGO work, but that's a really unique idea.
Right? It's really
Yes,
interesting that.
definitely. Yeah, okay. So we know in open source projects, like a lot of people can contribute towards a project, but that would mean a lot of other people, including your repo handler, would require you to write your code which is understandable.
Mhm.
So how do you manage that?
I think there are there's you can have processes in place. I think so. I like processes. I'm still learning to really get into the role of a CTO, but yeah. So I think from a process management perspective, there's tools that you have, right? You can have linters installed to make sure people follow the same coding practices, or on your CI, or you can have proper pull request systems. So, for example, at Pavio, we have a never commit to main rule, no exceptions, right? You make a PR, you can instantly merge it if you want, but you don't commit to main. And the reason is that we have a PR, you can assign people to it, you can request reviews, we can run all the CI and the linters and make sure the code is quality. The other people from the team can be auto assigned and they can quickly look at the files changed and see, hey, I don't understand this, could you explain this better? Or hey, maybe you can refactor this ternary in like a more readable way. And so I think now more than ever, there's a lot of tools that can help you. Apart from that, it's fine to not, man. Like, what's the worst that could happen? That you don't write high quality, performant, readable code, but you make a PR, and that's what matters. And then you get feedback from the community, right? Somebody comments that, hey, this can be better performance if you change this loop. Or this can be better if you comment this. Hey, I don't understand this. Why don't you add a few comments so that people understand it better? And so I think um, doing the contribution is way more important, I think, than doing it right every time, because the community is there. They're going to help you get it right, right? That's how you learn. And so I think, yeah, use automated tooling, use linters, use proper processes to ensure other people are reviewing your code. But more importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I think that's how you learn, right?
Yes, definitely. So, like, basically, you're saying that we should uh, do the action and then learn from it and then do better next time in case we
Yeah.
messed up
Sure,
or some.
exactly,
Yeah.
absolutely. But as maintainers, of course, if you have a really big project and lots of people are contributing, then sure, you can have rules, you can have CIs, you can have linting rules, you can have PR rules, you can even run Lightbox now on every PR and get accessibility audits. So like there's a lot of automated tooling that you can do to ensure quality code, but it should not be a requirement that stops people from contributing. I think it's more about getting more people to contribute and then help them write quality code.
Yes, definitely. So, one personal question I would like to ask is how has contributing to open source helped you as a developer?
Oh, I think it's the only thing that's helped me as a developer, right? Like I don't think I didn't have like proper classes to learn to code or something. I think like most of us, you're all self-taught. We learn on the internet. We look at. So I think um, the biggest thing, apart from I don't know free code camp or something today, is looking at open source code. Right, there's so much of code out there that if you have some questions about, I don't know, right, a couple of years ago, Lodash was a really popular library, and everyone would include underscore dot whatever, and just do things which otherwise would take them a Stack Overflow answer to see, hey, how do I merge these arrays, or how do I flatten it, or whatever. But now you would just look at the repo and look at the source code, and you would know, okay, that's actually really smart. This is how they flatten this array. And so I think um, the best way to be a better developer is, at least my rule of thumb is, whenever I do npm install, I stop myself for a second and I like to look at the source code of that project. This has a few other benefits, security benefits. You can quickly see if it's an active community, if it has types, stuff like that. But more importantly, you get the idea that, hey, if this package didn't exist, if I actually had to write all of this code by myself, how would I do it? And it can give you a head start in trying to really think about those concepts and answer that question. And so I think just going through all of the amazing code we have available is a really great head start in becoming a better developer. But apart from that, I think it's almost like learning by doing, in that if you just write more code, upload it, make it open source, say that no matter what, I'm going to at least one commit every day, or every week, or every month, um, then you would become a better developer just by, you would finish your 10,000 hours, like Malcolm Gladwell says in his book Outliers. And so I think there's definitely twofold, right? There's, you do it yourself, make your open source project, even if it's a small idea or a landing page, just make it public, let other people star it and open issues and contribute to it. And the second is, I think, look at that immense sea of all knowledge that is GitHub, and go through some code, and that's also a really good way to become a better developer. There's a lot of stuff that I've learned for the first time just by looking at other people's code. Like, for example, TypeScript. We only use TypeScript at Pavio. For like a couple of years, I've been like pure TypeScript now. Even if you look at my GitHub, I just, anywhere I can write TypeScript, I would write TypeScript. But I never like watched a 40-minute video. I just started writing TypeScript because it's so easy. And then there's still times where I might look at the source code and I realize, whoa, I didn't even know TypeScript had this feature. And I think just so that's why I think like that really makes me more observant. It gives me new ideas. It teaches me more. It's almost like reading the news, right? Like reading new code is exciting. It's new. You learn more. So I think a big part of being a better developer is also looking at other open source code.
Yes, definitely. Nowadays, like a lot of developers are contributing to society, so it's making it much easier for people who are new to this to learn coding and other technical stuff like design. So it has
Absolutely.
yes. So open source has definitely been a boon to all of us in the technical community. So on
Sure.
topic of that, what do you think is the future of open source and what
Ooh,
developments
that's
can
a
we
big
expect?
one. Um, so as part of the GitHub Stars program, we have some perks. Some of them are early access to GitHub features. We have to sign a little non-disclosure agreement, so you cannot tell other people about them. But what I'll say is that what's really like what you would want to be the future of open source, what would be your ultimate fantasy best case scenario, I think that's going to happen. uh, I always like to kind of look at history, right? Like if you look at how like Stalin or like Stallman and the free software movement, and how open source really got started with GNU and Linux and all of the great tools we have today. That was more like a hobbyist kind of. I'm doing counterculture, almost hippie culture, right? And then we went from that to like the red hats of like public open source companies and some dominance, and also at the same time comparing yourself to like Microsoft, which is the evil company, and with you know all the monopoly stuff that happened. I mean, we're all too young to actually remember it, but you can read up on it. And then we got to like today, like the third phase, I think, of which is now Microsoft is like a full flip, the probably the most important company in open source on earth, right? They have GitHub and NPM and VS Code and so much more. And so now we're in this place where people are not afraid to build open source, not afraid to build open source companies. There's so many great open source revenue models now, right? There's dual licensing. You can look at really good companies like Elastic or MongoDB, which are real healthy businesses who have open source projects in their core. And so I think now we're reaching a stage where people are really believing in open source, also the commercial aspect to it. I think that's really important because all of this time it's been a more volunteer-led effort. It's also majoritarily that today, but with tools like Patreon and Open Collective and now GitHub sponsors, maintainers finally have a chance to actually be full-time open source contributors, and more investors are excited about open source business models. And so I think the future of open source is mainstream, is more recognition that this is important, not just to give back to the ecosystem, but actually as a legitimate business model. It's a really good idea. And so I think the tools that we need for that are on the way. They are in the works. GitHub sponsors is one of my favorite examples that, like, I personally know some of my other co-stars who are full-time open source maintainers because they have really great projects that people want to donate to and give back to. The last thing I'll leave you with here is that I think donate is almost the wrong word for this, because it's really like you're getting something for free for years and now you're paying someone a little bit, $5 a month. I do that too, for their work. Of course, if thousands of people are paying you $5 a month, you can actually do that full time. For most people, that's not the case. And so I also like the idea of these open source business models or sponsorware, that, hey, I'll give you early access to my code if you become a sponsor, or I'll give you support or consultancy for your company. Tidal Lift is a big example of that. So I think there's a whole area of open source driven commerce and open source driven business that we are right in the beginning of. And I think that would be a really so yeah, if you guys want to start an open source company, now would be the best time to do it, because I think that would be a big part of the fourth kind of pillar of the open source revolution, that we go from volunteer led effort to people who are actually able to do work full time on open source.
Yes, definitely. Nowadays, a lot of companies are moving towards the open source model instead of having their own developers, professional, recognized developers, hired developers. So yeah, so it has been a very good thing that we can not only give back to the community but also earn from it.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the biggest reasons that people were afraid of open source, that if I can get a job for 200K at Google, why would I sit around and work on my open source project? At best, I would want to make it my 20% project at Google. And I think that's unfair because we're losing out on all of these really great open source projects. I think that's about to change, or at least maybe it's wishful thinking, but I like the direction we're heading in. Just like a really interesting example, really quickly before we move on. So Uptime, my open source Uptime monitor and status page repo, I made it as a way to kind of scratch my own itch. I was like, hey, I need an Uptime monitor. I found some on the internet which were free, but they're not super customizable. And then the paid ones like Atlassian was like hundreds or thousands of dollars per month. So I was like, hey, this GitHub's Actions thing is pretty cool. They have scheduled workflows. So maybe I can run a GitHub Actions workflow every 5 minutes and check if my site is online. And if it's not, I can open an issue. Right? That was the idea. So I built a little project. Now it's like 8,000 or something stars, going really well. I get an email from an investor saying, hey, I run this fund and it's a new fund. We work with companies which have an open core or open source business model. We invest $1 million for 10%, blah, blah, blah. Are you interested? And I said, well, I'm already running a company. This is our open source project. We want to leave it like that. But it was really motivating to know that open source projects can be real companies now. I have a lot of friends who are doing this now, and I think that's the direction that I'm really excited about. I think for me personally, that combines my interest and background in entrepreneurship with my interest and background in open source. And I think so that's like the space that I'm most excited about. So I want to see more startups, more SaaS businesses which are open core, maybe more innovation in how we do open source licensing. But I like the direction we're heading in.
Yes, definitely. So, could you tell us about your first open source project that you made?
Ooh. I can tell you about the first open source project that worked because I don't think I would remember the first open source project ever because I've been writing code for I don't know 10, 15 years, I guess. Maybe not 15. Definitely between 10 and 15. I think definitely more than 10. I'll have to check my math on that, but I remember I was probably in single digits when I wrote my first line of code or designed my first website. So it's been a while. Um, and I really started using GitHub maybe in 2013, 14. So it's also been like 5, 6 years that I properly started using it. I think I joined it before. So I probably don't remember what was my first open source project. What I will tell you is I think the first time I actually had community involvement, and that really made it a real project. Um, so I think this is 2015, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Um, and this is the time where Spotify is not very popular. Apple Music doesn't exist. Google Play Music probably doesn't exist. Maybe is coming out. Um, and people use like BMP3, songs.pk. Maybe some people are still on LimeWire. So I don't know if you guys remember any of these words, but this is how we used to download songs, pirate songs back in the day. It was a messy process, right? You would torrent stuff. Because buying songs, it's not expensive, but maybe it's actually hard. It was really hard. And so I thought, okay, there has to be a better way. My brother was like, this is really hard. He always used to ask me that, hey, can you please download these songs and send them to me? And I was like, isn't you just have to search for the song? Why are you wasting my time with this? Because apparently it was really hard for people to do that. So I made a little app called Saga Music. It was a web app, and I connected a bunch of APIs to make it work. How it worked was the first version. It was like a simple search, like the Google homepage, just like a little search box, nothing else. You would type the name of the song, and you would press enter, and that's it. You would download the song. And how it would work is that when you search, I would use the iTunes API and the YouTube API. So with YouTube, I would find the video of that song. Then I would use YouTube DL to convert it into an MP3. Then I would use the iTunes API to get all the metadata, like the album art and the information of the song embedded into the MP3 file generated and then download it. And so when you get the file, it would look like an original purchased MP3 because it has all the metadata and the album art. So if you put it on your iPhone or on your iPod, it looks like the real thing. Like one of my pet peeves was if you download songs on the internet, they don't have the proper album art ever. Anyway, so I built that. It worked really well. I think in 2 days it had like 10,000 downloads or something. And it went well. I made a little proper web version where you could actually stream music and stuff. And I got a contributor for the first time. Somebody told me, this is a really cool idea. Can I build an Android app for this? And I was like, absolutely. So we worked together and we built a really nice material design Android app, put it on the Play Store. So that was really like a big part of my life. And the first time I realized, whoa, I can write code and thousands or tens of thousands of people are going to use it. It's going to make their life easier and better. And more importantly, other people from the community are going to come and they want to help me and make it even better. This is like mind-blowing. This is great. So that was really my first experience. In case you're curious about how it ended a few months after that with me getting a legal notice from Google and them shutting it all down. But yeah, but it was a really good learning exercise. And so anyway, 2 recommendations. just start building and put it out there, right? You don't know what could happen. Worst case scenario, you'll be like me and you'll have 100 repos that nobody cares about, but you build them because you actually solved the problem. They were at least useful to you. But best case scenario, you actually make people's lives better. I think that's really meaningful. And second, learning, don't do piracy. It's not worth it. All right.
Yes, yes, definitely. So I would like to tell the audience that we are also doing an audience Q&A session. So kindly put your questions in the chat box. Um, I would like to ask another question. Uh, we know that GitHub is like the main platform for open source contributions. So are there any alternatives to it?
So there's a lot of interesting ideas in this space. I think I like so GitHub is a Git hosting platform, right? You can host your own Git platforms. You can use any of these other ones. For example, GitLab is the main other competitor to GitLab for the open source space. Lots of people I know use GitLab as well. They really like it. The founder of GitLab is from my university, so I love GitLab. I'm biased there, and it's also a Y Combinator company, so I'm double biased there. But I use GitHub just because it has the kind of strongest community. Like if you make a GitHub project open source, more people contribute because more people use the platform. It's like that's it. But a lot of people, especially in the kind of open source self-hosting space, love using GitLab because GitLab is open source also, and for open source. So that's like super exciting. And then if you want to do something commercial, there's a lot of other options like Bitbucket and this and that. So the question you should be asking is not like alternatives to GitHub, because the only reason you want to not use GitHub is maybe you don't like Microsoft, or it's like a counterculture thing, which it is for some people, and that's fair. Or you've had a bad experience and you don't trust them anymore. But I would actually, if that's the case, if any of those things are the case, I would say give it another shot. I think it's worth it. GitLab is really good, and actually usually years ahead of GitHub in terms of the new features and the exciting stuff happening, and that it's open source. You can actually make a PR yourself. But GitHub just gives you that community and more resources. And now that it's integrated with NPM, and GitHub is doing all of this great stuff in the security vulnerability space, and they have the new issues, the new projects. I think last couple of years since the acquisition, GitHub has really done a really good job with these new features and exciting community innovations. They also have these really cool features for India now. So if you go to github.com/github/India, you have the externship program that we were part of. We were one of the first companies who hired GitHub externs. You have the community grant, so you can actually get money from GitHub to fund your open source project. So I think there's a lot of great stuff everywhere. Do you want to use GitLab? Go ahead and use GitLab. It's also really good. The only thing I would say is I think the platform doesn't matter as much as what's on the platform, right? Like we don't hate Facebook because the UI is not good. We don't like it because misinformation. And we love GitHub not because the logo is nice, or we like Octocats, which we do, but really it's about the code and the healthy ecosystem that's there. And so I think the better question is, how can I make the most impact, or where do I have a new idea that I think I can build an open source project for? And then which platform you use or which programming language you use. There's pros and cons for everything, so it depends case to case. But I would say just get started.
Yes, definitely. I was just asking you because some people wanted to explore some other platforms aside from GitHub. So, okay, we have a question here. Do you think government institutions can play a role in promoting open source software, like USPTO?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I think institutions of any kind play a big role just because they hire people, or they're impactful. So yeah, the trademark office of the United States has some projects, but actually, I think my favorite one is the British government's digital team. So if you Google GitHub UK digital, you will find it. They have some of the smartest minds, I think, in also accessibility and web development. And all of the British health system and all of the online forms on the government site and stuff, all of the components that they use to build them, which of course have to be accessible and thorough and really nice, are all open source. And so that's like one side, right? That's the whole government side. I think India also does a interesting job. For example, data.gov.in is like the portal where you can get all the data about the entire country, everything free. And then you can use it, right? You can train a Python classifier on all of the farmer subsidies and get some really interesting results. So yeah, I think governments can do a good job. I think some of them are already doing a good job, but there's more to be done. That's like one side. I think institutions means a lot, right? So there's like the whole educational institutions. I think some of them are starting to do a really good job, and then there's like business institutions. So I think companies giving back to the ecosystem, but also for selfish interest that if they're a good open source company, more people want to work there. We do the same thing. So github.com/Pabio has all of our open source projects, and github.com/uptime with two P's is our main open source project, Uptime. So I think institutions have this almost responsibility of being good role models, and I think contributing to open source is a big part of that. They also have the workforce, right? They can hire more people, and if they do a good job, it becomes open source. Um, and I think big companies are definitely overrepresented, right? If you look at React, which Facebook makes, or GraphQL, so some really interesting internal projects that became public. The same case with, let's say, Kubernetes from Google, or Docker from Docker. So like companies who have great ideas build something and they think it's really going to be useful for everyone, so they make it open source. Same happens with government institutions. So I would leave you with one last point. India Stack, they were popular a couple of years ago. I was also part of it a while back. Is the team that did a bunch of stuff in Aadhaar and in consent from your phone app and in DigiLocker, stuff like that. They did a bunch of open source stuff. So also in India, there's a lot of cool open source stuff happening from companies, from government. So yeah, I think it's a good. I think they have a responsibility. Some of them are starting to do a good job. I think this would definitely be a big thing in the next couple years, maybe a decade. I think it's going to be a big part. Also because we pay taxes, right? Like, so it's almost like our right to get what code the government are writing. And so I think this thought shift has happened lately, that governments are more motivated to do open source code or make. So just like during the pandemic, we had so many COVID tracking apps, and a lot of these are fully open source on GitHub. Some of the good ones are as well. And also the protocol, for example, for the EU QR code, it's all open source. And it has to be so that other countries can learn from it and do a better job. But also it has to be because you have accountability to the citizens, especially if you're asking them to, trade their privacy for health. So I think we're going to see this more. Governments are getting started. Some of them are doing a better job than others. I think India is also doing a good job. But I think this is going to grow. Absolutely. Otherwise, we should make them do it, because I think it's only fair.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Institutions getting into open source has historically been pretty well received and has created some really good products.
I mean, we use
So
the MIT license, right?
yes, so I guess we are running out of time. So what would you say to all the people who are wanting to take part in the Hacktoberfest and contribute
Do it.
towards the open source?
That's it. It's really simple. I think start by starting. I would say a couple things. No PR is too small. It doesn't matter if you fix a typo or a capitalization or something. It adds up. Improving the docs is a really good idea to get started if you're slightly intimidated. Um, but if you're confident, or if you just want to get started, make a PR. Okay, here's the thing, right? What is the absolute worst case scenario? Absolutely, the worst thing that could happen is they close your PR, and then what? You make another one, right? Like it's okay. That's how we learn. And I think so. Like DigitalOcean and GitHub and all of these great companies have come together. Hacktoberfest is a great idea. just start. There's so many great projects that need help. Sometimes it's single volunteers who've been spending all of their time on this open source project, and they need your help. Sometimes it's a big project where you think you can add a little bit or remove a little bit, and it would make it better. And then sometimes it's just opening an issue with a new idea or upvoting a discussion. Either way, no contribution is too small. So just start by starting. Just don't be afraid. Make a PR. And that's it. Worst case scenario, they don't like what your idea, then you make another PR for a new project. Either way, I think you're gonna learn something. So it's a great idea. I wish you all the best. I hope you all participate, and I hope everyone just makes one PR. That would make a world of difference to the open source community.
Yes, definitely. It was a very nice time talking to you, and I hope the audience also had a very good time. Guys, just stick around for our mentor session. He will show you around how to contribute to repos, how to make pull requests. So over to you, Rashi.
Thank you so much for joining, sir.
Thank you
So,
so much for having me.
so now we'll get started with the hands-on session by our very own open source mentor Hari Prashant, who will guide you to make your first open source contribution.
Yeah, hi guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're
Yeah.
audible.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we'll get started with that. Yeah. So I hope my screen's visible. Let's start with that. So I'll be taking the session on how you can get started with contributing to open source. What the things you're supposed to do to find the right project to work with, and what steps you'll be taking after that. So, firstly, I'll just reiterate on why you should be contributing to open source software. I'm pretty sure the previous session already gave you a good idea about why you should do that. But some quick points are: the first thing is it's a chance to give back to the community. I'm assuming most of the people watching the session are students. So, the first thing that you would be doing when you start any project is importing the libraries, the appropriate ones, and I'm pretty sure most of them or almost all of them are open source. So you're already using the projects, so it kind of becomes like a moral right or a moral purpose for you to have to like give back to the community. So that's the first point. The other points are perks to yourself. You get to widen your skill set depending on the project you choose. Uh, you can always pick a project to work on based on what you're already familiar with. But I'd also recommend looking at newer projects that you might not know the underlying technologies of, but you still find interesting. You also get to network with various other people working on the project, and the people that maintain the projects, they usually are knowledgeable people. They probably have been doing that for a while, and interacting with them and getting your code reviewed by them will also help you learn a lot. So the next point is you inculcate good habits when it comes to writing code, because uh, there's a good way to write code and a bad way to write code, and we often follow the bad way when it's just a personal project or some project that you're doing with a deadline. But the ideal approach should be writing good code that anyone reading can just pick up on, because open source code is for everyone. And the last point is you get a head start in software development, and that will just boost your confidence tenfold, like it has for me at least. So we'll go through some common words you'll encounter in any open source project, irrespective of where it's hosted. The first point is issues, which are used to keep track of any new code changes suggested, or any bugs that have to be fixed. And they're usually found on this list called the issue tracker. Almost every project has one. You just have to find it and go through the issues on the list, see which one you like, and read the description of that one. The next point is a commit. A commit is a change or a group of changes to code, and you can make commits with reasonably related changes, so that each commit uh, makes an understandable change, and it's easier for people to uh, get an idea of what you're trying to implement with a particular commit. And the next thing is pull requests or patches. You might hear either of these words in open source communities, which is basically you sending the project a request saying you've made these so and so commits and you want them merged to the project. So that will like let the maintainers know that you've done work, and they'll take their time and review it. So the last point is reviews. So when you submit a pull request, obviously they don't just merge it; they'll take a look at it, and most maintainers will give you a thorough review of what changes they expect from you, because at least initially you don't have a good idea of how things are done in open source projects, or in that particular project at least. So you'll take your time to learn how their ecosystem works, and till then I'm pretty sure the maintainers will be patient with your reviews and help you understand their project better, because you are investing your time to help their project out too, so they are also aware of that. So the next section in this session is how do I start contributing? So the first point would be to pick a project that interests you. There are many lists online. I have a couple of lists in the next slide that I'll show you. So you can go through these lists and look at different kinds of projects, and pick something that is using technologies that you worked with, or even if you're unfamiliar with what they're using, if you find the project interesting, you can always join the community, ask around on how to get started with learning those tools, and then learn and contribute. So these are some of the lists that I think have good resources on how to find the right project. So with that, I'll also be going through these steps practically, so that you understand how to do it. I've already chosen one organization that I've previously worked with to show you guys. And the organization is called Zulip. This is Zulip's GitHub repository. It's basically a chat application. It's written in Python using the Django framework, and there's also JavaScript on the front end. So Zulip uses GitHub as the code hosting website for all its projects. So you'll find everything on GitHub here. So for any project on GitHub or GitLab or most other code hosting websites, there's usually a README, and most open source projects have a good section like the one you see here about getting started. I would recommend reading that, which is the next point in the presentation. Browse the documentation. Good projects often have sections for newcomers, so you will have to put your effort to read that section, because they put in efforts to craft that section for you, that section of the documentation. So since we're looking at code contributions, we'll just click the guide for new contributors, and then we're on their documentation now. And then there's a quick point about the community and ways to contribute and all of the other stuff that any newcomer would need to read. So I would suggest going through that first before you approach the community, and just be aware of what's happening in the project. So the next point would be join their communication channel. Different open source projects use different channels. Some people use IRC, some people use Slack. Since Zulip is a chat application itself, Zulip uses the Zulip server. I'll just show you how it looks. There are different ways to join the server. You can just click on join as a contributor and sign up, or if it's Slack or something else, there'll usually be an invite for you, and you can just make an account and join the channel to talk to maintainers and other contributors. So the next point would be setting up the development environment. I'm pretty sure the section that we spoke about, the getting started and the contributing sections of the README, they will usually have instructions for how you set up the project on your local system. So you have to make sure that you set the environment up properly. The documentation usually has quick points on what you're supposed to do if you run into specific errors. But if you run into something that's not already listed there, you can always feel free to reach out to the community's server that you joined, and you can ask the maintainers. And if that actually is a genuine unique error that hasn't come up before, you can probably contribute to the documentation saying this is an error that people might face, and uh, I'd like to document it, and so that the next time someone has this error, they don't have to ask someone. So uh, that would be a very important step for you to do, which is setting the environment up. The next point would be to browse the issue tracker, like we discussed before. All the issues are open on the issue tracker. There are some tags that you can look out for, which are good first issue and beginner friendly, and sometimes even help wanted tag. So these tags are usually for people who are new to the project. You can, and they usually have like a good description of the issue mentioned too, so that you know what you're supposed to go read up on or experiment with before you tackle the particular issue. So look out for these tags and check out issues with these tags. So I'll just like quickly go through Zulip's issue section so that you know how it looks like. So this is how the issue tracker on GitHub looks. And this is one good thing GitHub does. There's two quick points where they link to the contributing guidelines, which is what we just looked at. And you can also click on this link and it automatically filters the issues with the good first issue label. And on clicking on that, you have a list of all the good first issues there are in the project. And you can just click on any of them, and there's a good description. There's link to the documentation that you're supposed to read for understanding how to implement it, and that's how you uh, go through the issues. So the next point is to claim the issue, because looking at the issue and starting work on it isn't enough, because there may be other people that are interested in the issue that you're looking at. So the quick point would be to send in a comment like this saying you would like to work on the issue or something, so that maintainers or any other people who want to work on it know that you are on it, and they will go find something else. And if the issue is not suitable for you, the maintainer will make sure to let you know that you should probably find something else. So in both those ways, it will benefit you if you claim the issue. So the next point is to read code thoroughly. This is a very important point for you to keep in mind, because you can solve half your problems about queries that you have regarding the code by reading the code itself. Usually people take open source projects make various deep efforts to make sure that the code is as readable as possible. They use code formatters, they use linters, they adhere to different rules like number of characters in a line and a bunch of other things, so that the code is uniform and there's a single style that's applied throughout the project, which is also important because there are many contributors. Each might have their own style of coding, but it's important in a project to know what the style of the project is. So reading code will also help you understand what the style is, so that you're aware how to write code when you are making those changes. So the next point is, don't hesitate to ask for help. Most of the maintainers and other contributors to the project are very helpful. That is the case for almost every open source project. Even if it's a small one, the maintainer is usually very helpful. So you can always feel free to ask for help if you're stuck on some point. But one quick point here is that you're supposed to do all the background work there is to that particular issue. You cannot be asking unreasonable questions that you could have maybe have just Googled and found the answer to. So do all the Googling, do the background work, read the documentation of the tools that are being used, do all of that. But if you're still stuck, you can always ask people out, and they will be more than happy to help you out. The next point is cross-check before you submit a pull request. So when you make changes and make commits, like what we discussed before, and then you want to submit a pull request, there is usually a checklist that you have to follow before every pull request at an open source project, which is to run testing checks, run linting checks. There are usually commands and tools that they've already custom built for the project. So just read the documentation and it will tell you how to run tests for your project, and ensure that whatever changes you've made to the code aren't breaking changes, because a breaking change isn't desirable. So make sure you run every such check there is, and ensure that whatever code you're writing is can be approved based on whatever automated standards they have. So with that, we'll conclude with how you are supposed to get started with getting in touch with the community and starting out. I can quickly show you the pull request section of the Zulip project. It's usually something like this, where in the Zulip project, we require that you upload screenshots to any changes you've made and other things like that. And there's also commits that show up here from GitHub side. So this is somewhat of an ideal pull request. So you have to make sure that you know what the pull request template is, or something, and that you adhere to it before you open one. So the next thing we'll be taking a look at is open source programs. Since most of you would be students, you can find some good programs for you to take part in that give you an incentive to contribute to open source, like giving you bragging rights, giving you a handsome stipend, and a bunch of other things like that. So the first one is Hacktoberfest, which is what this session is a part of. It's a great program because a lot of smaller scale open source projects are also included in this, so that beginners aren't necessarily intimidated by projects with large code bases. You can just pick a bite-sized issue from a regular normal sized project, and you can quickly make 4 pull requests, I believe, to finish your requirement for Hacktoberfest and complete the tasks. So Hacktoberfest would be a very beginner friendly program for you to participate in. So definitely do that. The next one we'll be looking at is Google Summer of Code. You might have heard of this, and if you haven't, it's basically like a program where you work on a chosen open source project for around 10 weeks, and Google is basically the third party that organizes the program and gets you in touch with the open source project, with their community, and Google also will pay you at the end, because they understand that as students, if you're spending a summer here, you need incentive, because you could maybe be doing an internship somewhere else, but you are contributing to the betterment of open source. So there's that. Another similar program would be the MLH Fellowship, at least the open source track, where again you get to work in pods, I believe, which is small teams of students that are working on a particular open source project, and you will also have a mentor, just like GSOC, who will guide you to make your open source contributions. The next program would be the LFX mentorship, which is the Linux Foundation's equivalent of GSOC, and they have some really interesting cloud projects that take part, that you can, participate in and contribute to. So you can definitely check that out as well. So most of these programs have a very simple idea in mind, which is to get students involved with open source, because we all have to play our part in sustaining open source, because open source is run by the community. The people who contribute are the ones who actually run the project, who run the project, who take it forward, who drive the project forward to have newer features. That's the beautiful part about open source, because in most projects, like if you look at their features, most of them will be community driven, because some contributor may feel that there could be a feature in a particular project, and but it isn't actually there at the moment, so they might put in the time and the effort to implement that feature themselves. So you will definitely find good features on any open source project for all your needs, whatever the project is. So the, that's the important part about contributing to open source, and why there are so many programs that help beginners and students get started with it. So the next point would be the other ways you can contribute to open source projects, because writing code is not the only way to do so. Even if you're not an active developer yourself, you can still contribute in other ways. Some of them are writing documentation for projects. Like if you see some part of a project undocumented or unclear to other people, or like we just discussed a while ago, if you run into an error while setting up the environment, you can always go write documentation for it, saying if you don't do this right, you may run into this error, so this would be a workaround for it, or something like that. Or if you understand the project well enough, you can do some technical writing in the documentation for them. That's a very good way to contribute, and is appreciated just as much. You can also help translate the existing documentation to more languages. In the project that we saw a while ago, the Zulip project, I believe there's also a translation for the documentation in Hindi. So you can just go and help out with translation, so that if someone who's not familiar with English wants to contribute, they can still read the documentation in their own language and contribute. So the more languages, the better. You can report issues you observe while running the project. If you're using a library or something and you run into an error while using it in your own project, you can raise an issue in that issue tracker. Most issue trackers are open for you to report issues. You don't have to be a member of the organization or a contributor to the project to do so. So you can definitely check the project out and report any issues that you see with the project. Or if there are feature requests, you can do that as well. If you think you, while using the project, think that there's some feature that isn't in the project right now, but you think would really help it, you can definitely raise a feature request, and the contributors and developers on the project will make it a point to note that down. And of course, you can provide feedback. Like I said, when you join the community server, there's usually a separate stream or a channel uh, dedicated to collecting user feedback. So you can definitely go and give in your input there, and I'm pretty sure they value that feedback quite a bit. So that's a very good thing to do with an open source project. So with that, I'll conclude my session and I'll open up to questions from the audience. So I think there aren't any questions at the moment. I'll make one quick point to note to showcase how CodeChef-VIT is trying to help newcomers get started with open source. We have our own set of repositories that you can contribute to, and they are decent sized projects so that there isn't too much reading you have to do to get started with the project. I'll quickly share my screen and show you a project or two. Uh, so the first one that we're looking at is OAuth Pro. This is part of our Hacktoberfest repositories. And like I mentioned, if you look at the README, there's everything you need to know about the project, and there's instructions for you to follow to open pull requests and make other contributions. So you can just read those and you can get started. The issues tracker that we discussed for the other project, we are making an effort to open good issues for newcomers to get started with, and there are also fairly decent tags that categorize these issues into various types. So you can just look at one that you find interesting, or a technology you find interesting. Let's just say Django. If I find that interesting, I'll just click on it, and you can find issues for Django, and that's how you look at issues and collect good ones for you to contribute and proceed with making contributions. And make sure to read the readme. This is a very important point that I would like to reiterate on again and again. So make sure you read the readme, the contributing guidelines, and then open your pull requests. We would be more than happy to help you out with anything. If you're stuck somewhere, just either open an issue or a pull request and discuss it with us. And we'd love to help you get going. So with that, I'd like to conclude my session. We're looking forward to your pull requests at within our projects at CodeChef. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I guess that's it for today. We hope you learned some exciting stuff. So all of you, don't forget to make your first open source contribution for Hacktober if you still haven't. And check out the CodeChef repository. The link is provided in the description. Also, do not hesitate to reach out to us for any further doubts. I think that's a wrap up.